Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to our latest Trade of Black podcast. I am your host, Shad Dales, and today we're digging into a question that's shaping the future of the cannabis industry. It's the path forward on rescheduling or full-blown regulation. We're deep now into 2025, and while cannabis reform is gaining some momentum again, the rescheduling process that started with big headlines last year has been stuck in neutral. In fact, 6 months ago, back in January of 2025, the DEA quietly announced that it was postponing an administrative law judge hearing tied to the rescheduling review. Since then, not much. No updates, no timeline, just silence. So now the focus may be shifting towards regulation and possibly even congressional action. So with that, let's break it down. So let's first quickly rewind. Back in late of 2023, the Department of Health and Human Services recommended moving cannabis from a Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. That triggered a formal review by the DEA. Then in January of 2025, the Department of Justice confirmed that a planned ALJ hearing expected to lay out next steps was being postponed indefinitely. At the time, it was viewed as a procedural delay. But here we are 6 months later and still no clarity. No public comment, no follow-up statement, and no final ruling. This has many in the industry and in Washington rethinking the whole approach. So for those that are new, what would Schedule 3 actually do? First, it would officially acknowledge that cannabis has medical value, something that's long overdue. Second, it would allow for expanded research and access to federal grants. But the biggest impact for the industry, it would eliminate the burden of 280E taxes. Right now, cannabis businesses can't deduct basic expenses like rent, payroll, or marketing, even if they're fully legal under state law. Schedule 3 would fix that. But it's not legalization. It wouldn't open the door to interstate commerce. It wouldn't remove criminal penalties across the board. That's why some are starting to ask, is rescheduling enough? So the next big question is, why hasn't the DEA made a move? Some say it's internal politics and others say it's legal caution. There are also reports that the agency is navigating competing pressures from law enforcement groups, the pharmaceutical lobby, and even some corners of Congress. And let's not forget, there's a federal lawsuit in play right now alleging that the review process was biased. So that lawsuit is likely part of the reason the DOJ has been radio silent in recent months. So while the White House has initially supported rescheduling, the ball is now firmly in the DEA's court, and they're not in a hurry, to say the least. But that could be changing, because here's where things get interesting. Congress doesn't have to wait. According to a report from the Congressional Research Service, lawmakers can bypass the DEA entirely and reschedule or deschedule cannabis through legislation. And with the House now under Republican control and the big beautiful bill on crypto having just passed, there's a real chance that cannabis reform gets attached to another financial or regulatory package. One possibility, a cannabis banking fix could ride along with broader digital asset regulation. And that brings us to another key player, Senator Tim Scott. Senator Scott recently said that the crypto market structure bill is a big piece of financial reform and is targeted for completion by September 30th. And that's important. Why? Because President Trump has already hinted that financial modernization could include an executive order tying crypto, banking access, and even cannabis. If that happens, we may see the safer banking framework brought back into play. That would, one, let cannabis businesses access normal banking. It would also open up lending, insurance, and credit, and it would create more transparency in financial reporting. So even if the DEA stays frozen, reform might still move through the banking system. And hallelujah, would we want that, those that follow the cannabis space. So here's the real conversation. If rescheduling is slow, if DEA leadership stays silent, and if lawsuits keep dragging out the timeline, regulation may become the more realistic path. That means national safety standards for edibles and concentrates, guidelines for labeling, dosing, and packaging, federal oversight on interstate shipments, and protections for state legal operators from federal interference. Basically, treating cannabis like alcohol or tobacco, not heroin. Seems like common sense, right? So this wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it could stabilize the industry and finally bring consistency across state lines. That's something investors, patients, and operators have all been asking for. So what happens now? We're watching these three main things. One, does Congress finally take take control of cannabis policy? 2, will banking reform and cannabis reform get tied together before September 30th? And 3, could Trump issue an executive order that forces progress, regardless of what the DEA decides? The DEA process has stalled, that's a fact, but the conversation is far from over. And with new markets like Delaware going live on August 1st and brands scaling across the U.S., the momentum for reform is very, very real. The only question is, will it come from science or politics? That's always been the big question here in the U.S. So with that, that's where we'll leave it for now. Is cannabis going to be rescheduled or finally get regulated like alcohol? Let us know by leaving your comments below. We want to keep this conversation going. This is probably the most important and popular topic in the cannabis space right now. So again, appreciate your feedback. As usual, make sure to like, subscribe, and smash on that bell for all notifications, and stay connected with us here at the Trade to Black podcast. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and like I always say, stay open-minded, stay connected, and I'll see you next time on our latest Trade to Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Thanks again for watching.